Clara Whitmore had not cried in 11 years. Not when they buried her father. Not when the bank took her cattle. Not even when her neighbors crossed the street to avoid her shadow. But the morning Silas Blackwood rode down from the mountain and pulled up a chair beside her in front of every person who had ever turned their back. Her hands shook for the first time in a decade. Not from fear. From something she had nearly forgotten the name of. If this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city below. I want to see how far this has traveled. Clara Whitmore had not asked for help in 11 years. Not once. Not after the first winter took her father. Not after the second winter took her husband. Not after the third winter, the cruelest one, took everything else. She had learned something in those years that no one ever teaches a woman plainly, but that the world delivers one lesson at a time, patient and merciless as frost. She had learned that asking for help was the fastest way to show someone where to push. So she stopped asking. She fixed fences with her own hands bleeding through her gloves in December. She drove the wagon herself 40 miles round trip to the trading post in Harlan Creek, even when the road flooded and the mule threw a shoe. She calculated every debt, every season, every ounce of feed in a leather ledger. Her father had left her, the only inheritance that hadn't been taken, borrowed, or taxed away. By the summer of 1884, Clara Whitmore was 31 years old, and she ran the last working ranch on the north slope of the Beartooth Range entirely alone. Nobody respected her for it. They talked about her instead. The women at the mercantile said she had driven off 2 husbands, which was a lie, though only one of them knew it, and she was too proud to correct the others. The men at the saloon said she was unnatural. A woman that stubborn, that solitary, that unbowed. There had to be something wrong with her. Something broken underneath the surface, like a board that looks solid until you step on it. They called her the mountain's widow. Not as a kindness. The summer that changed everything began on a Tuesday in July, when the heat pressed down on Harlan Creek like a hand flat against a throat, and Clara drove her wagon into town to collect seed supplies and a bolt of canvas she had ordered 6 weeks prior. She had a list. She always had a list. She did not have patience for what was waiting. The trading post in Harlan Creek was owned by a man named Doyle Marsh, who had the particular talent of being pleasant to your face and calculating behind your back. He smiled when Clara came through the door, but it was the kind of smile that had math behind it. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, already moving around the counter. "Been expecting you." "The canvas," she said, "and the seed order. I'll take them both today." "About that." He set both hands flat on the counter. "There's been a change in the arrangement." Clara stopped walking. "What kind of change?" It was not a question. It was the sound a woman makes when she already knows the answer and is giving the other person one chance to lie to her face so she can remember it later. Doyle reached under the counter and produced a folded piece of paper. "Nathan Caldwell came in last week. Said the south quarter of your property, the creek-adjacent parcel, it's been flagged in a title dispute. Old contract from your father's time. Until it's resolved, he's asked that I not extend further credit against the Whitmore land." Clara did not move. She looked at the paper. She did not take it. "My father bought that land outright in 1861, she said. "I have the deed. I have the survey. I have the water rights registered in the territorial office." "Yes, well." Doyle slid the paper further across the counter. "Mr. Caldwell has documentation suggesting otherwise." "Nathan Caldwell wants my water source," Clara said. "That's what he has." "Mrs. Whitmore, he's wanted it for 3 years. Every year he makes an offer. Every year I say no. And now suddenly there's a contract dispute." Her voice was perfectly level. That was the thing people in Harlan Creek never understood about Clara Whitmore. She did not get loud when she was angry. She got still. "Tell me, Doyle, did Nathan Caldwell's documentation arrive before or after my order was placed?" Doyle looked uncomfortable. "I'm not at liberty to." "Before, obviously." She put both hands on the counter. "I'd like my seed order. I paid the deposit 4 weeks ago. I have the receipt." "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm afraid I can't." "You can," she said. "You're choosing not to." The room had gone quiet. There were 4 other people in the trading post. 2 men she recognized from the mill. a young woman collecting mail, and an older rancher named Hicks, who had been her father's acquaintance before he decided her presence was more trouble than it was worth. Not one of them said anything. Not one of them looked away from their business. Clara understood. This was how it always worked. Nathan Caldwell didn't need to threaten anyone directly. He just had to make it clear which side had power and which side had a woman standing alone, and the rest of the town arranged itself accordingly. She picked up the paper from the counter. She read it. Her jaw tightened, but her hands were steady. "This is a forgery," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore, the notary seal is from the Douglas County office. My father's land was registered in Stillwater County. He never had business in Douglas." She set the paper back down. "This document was manufactured, and I intend to say so to the Territorial Land Office in writing by the end of this week." Doyle's expression shifted. Not guilt, he was past guilt. Something more like inconvenience. "That's your right, of course." "My seed order," she said again. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't." Behind her, one of the millmen laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was the small dismissive kind, the kind that says we both know how this ends. Clara turned around. She looked at the man who had laughed. She held his gaze long enough that he looked away first. Then she walked toward the door. She was on the porch steps when she heard the voice. Not Doyle's. Not any voice she recognized. Low. Quiet. The kind of voice that does not bother getting louder because it has never needed to. "That paper's got a problem." She turned. A man was sitting in the chair beside the trading post door, the old wooden chair that Doyle kept there for no reason anyone had ever understood. She had walked right past him coming in and had not registered him, which meant he had a quality she associated with wilderness. The ability to be completely still in a way that made him part of the background. How was tall she could tell even sitting. Broad in the shoulder, lean everywhere else, with the kind of build that comes from decades of actual work, rather than the performed strength of men who want to look formidable. Dark hair longer than fashionable, pushed back without ceremony. A beard that had not been trimmed with any particular intention. Skin weathered by altitude and seasons. How was wearing a vest but no jacket despite the heat, and his boots were the boots of a man who had ridden many miles in them and intended to ride many more. He was looking at the paper she still held in her hand. "Stillwater County seal's been used on Douglas County forms before," he said. "But not before 1878. Your father's land registration, you said 1861. So whoever made that document either didn't know the history of those county offices or didn't think anyone else would." Clara stared at him. "Who are you?" she said. He looked up at her then. His eyes were dark, a dark that had distance in it, like looking at a tree line from far away. Not cold, just used to seeing a long way without anything to say about it. "Silas Blackwood," he said. "That doesn't answer my question." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." He stood up. He was, in fact, very tall. He picked up the hat that had been sitting on his knee, old, dark, not particularly cared for, and settled it on his head in the unhurried way of a man who has nowhere urgent to be. "I came down from the Beartooth Quarter this morning," he said, "selling 2 horses at the livery, stopping here for supplies." He glanced at the door of the trading post, then back at her. "Heard the whole conversation?" Clara studied him. In her experience, a man who heard that kind of conversation from a stranger had 2 reasons to mention it. Either he wanted something from her, or he wanted her to feel grateful, so she would give him something later. "And," she said. "And nothing," Silas said. "Just thought you'd want to know your instinct about the paper was right. The county seal detail would be hard to catch if you didn't know the history." He moved to step past her toward the street. "Wait," she said. He stopped. "You know county land registration history," she said. "Why?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. More like the suggestion of one the way a match flame suggests warmth before it catches. "My family had a land dispute once," he said. "Long time ago. I spent a considerable number of months learning things I didn't want to know about documentation, county offices, and how men with money bury their crimes in paperwork." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry about your seed order, Mrs. Whitmore." He tipped his hat. He walked down the steps. Clara stood there holding a forged document and watching a stranger cross the street toward the livery stable, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt curious. She told herself it was the information that interested her. That was all. She told herself this 3 times on the drive back toward the Whitmore ranch, and she almost believed it by the time she reached the turnoff. The land spread out around her in the way Montana land does in July, vast and indifferent and astonishingly beautiful, in a manner that has nothing to do with comfort. And she thought about Nathan Caldwell's forged document and the county seal discrepancy, and the fact that a man she had never seen before had noticed something she might have missed. That bothered her. Not the man. The missing. She had spent 11 years making sure she missed nothing because missing things had consequences she could not afford. She unhitched the mule at the barn fed and watered the animals, and stood in the doorway of the barn, looking at the land her father had broken his back on, and her husband had died on, and she had held on to with something past stubbornness, past pride, something that didn't have a comfortable name. The creek was visible from here, glinting through the willows at the south end of the property. The water source that Nathan Caldwell wanted. It fed her stock. It fed her kitchen garden. Without it, the North Slope land was dry in August and frozen solid by October and nearly worthless until May. Nathan knew that. That was why the south parcel was always the parcel he disputed offered for angled toward. He didn't want the ranch house or the grazing land or the barn. He wanted the 40 acres that held the creek, and if he got those 40 acres, the rest of the ranch would fail within 2 seasons. He had been patient about it. She had to give him that. 3 years of patience, and now this. A forged document and a supply merchant willing to cut her credit on his behalf. She went inside and opened the ledger. She looked at the numbers. She had enough seed left from last season to plant half the kitchen garden. Enough feed for the stock through August if she rationed it. The canvas could wait. She could patch the south lean-to with what she had. But the seed order mattered. Without the seed order, she lost the second planting, and without the second planting, the winter margin would be thin enough to cut through. Nathan knew that too. He had chosen his timing carefully. She was still at the table making her calculations when she heard the sound of a horse in the yard. She was on her feet before she was fully decided about it, the way the body moves when it has been conditioned by years of needing to be ready. She picked up the rifle from beside the door, not raised, just in hand, and stepped out onto the porch. The man on the horse was Silas Blackwood. He had a different horse now than the one he'd ridden presumably from the livery transaction, a bay mare with good lines, calm under the summer heat. He stopped at the edge of the yard and did not come closer. "I'm not here for anything," he said, which was an odd way to begin. "I mean no intrusion. But I've been sitting with that conversation all afternoon, and there's something practical I can offer if you want it." Clara held the rifle at her side. Not threatening, just present. "Talk," she said. "I know a man in Billings," Silas said. "Retired territorial surveyor. He's worked county land registration going back to the 1850s. If anyone can document the inconsistencies in that Caldwell paper and give you something official to file with the land office, it's him." "I don't have money to pay a surveyor." "I'm not asking you to. I'm saying I know a man. I can write him a letter today and have it on the stage tomorrow. Whether he can help and what he charges is a conversation between you and him." Clara looked at him. She had learned to read men the way she read weather, not perfectly, but well enough to survive. There was something in this man that she could not easily categorize, and that made her cautious, because she had learned that the things you couldn't categorize were the things that surprised you. "What do you want for this?" she said. He seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Not offended. Surprised. "Nothing," he said. "Men don't ride 7 miles out from Harlan Creek in July heat to offer a stranger information for nothing." "No," he agreed. "I suppose they don't." He was quiet a moment. "I told you my family had a land dispute. The man who helped us at the time didn't ask for anything either. It stuck with me." Clara studied him. "You're a mountain man," she said. "You sell horses, and you come down when you have to, and you go back up. What happens up there?" "I run a small herd. Mostly work the timber claims in winter. He paused. I'm not looking for community if that's what you're asking. I'm asking why a man who isn't looking for community involves himself in a stranger's legal problem. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that is doing something behind the eyes. Because I watched a room full of people let it happen, he said, and not one of them said a word. And I've been the only person in a room often enough to know what that feels like from the inside. The evening light was long and golden across the yard, the way Montana. Summer evenings get the sky still wide and bright while the shadows stretched east. The horses in the paddock were quiet. Everything was quiet. Clara lowered the rifle to her side. Write the letter, she said.
Doll.
He did not leave that evening. This was not her intention, and she believed it was not his, but the letter took longer than expected because Clara brought out the original deed documents and the water rights registration and the territorial survey from 1862. And Silas sat at her kitchen table, looking through them with the slow, methodical attention of someone who knows what they're looking for. Your father was thorough, he said. My father was careful, Clara said. He didn't trust anything he couldn't put on paper. Smart man. He knew what it was to fight for something without witnesses. Silas looked up from the documents. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It was too much, too interior, too revealing. She picked up the coffee pot from the stove and refilled his cup without asking, because it gave her hands something to do. The water rights registration is the strongest piece you have, he said, returning to the documents. This was filed before the county consolidation in 1873, which means it predates the administrative changes Nathan Caldwell is likely exploiting. If his document claims a purchase agreement from before the consolidation, the relevant jurisdiction would have been Stillwater, not Douglas. The seals wouldn't match. Can you write that down? Clara said. The exact reasoning, so I understand it well enough to explain it. He looked at her. You're going to handle the land office yourself, he said. It was not a question. I've handled everything else myself. The Territorial Land Office in Billings requires. I know what it requires, she said. I've been there before, when Nathan made the first offer and I wanted to make sure my registration was solid. She sat down across from him. I'm not asking you to fight my battle, Mr. Blackwood. I'm asking you to help me understand my own documents clearly enough to fight it myself. Something changed in his expression. She would not have described it as admiration exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone who has found something they weren't expecting and isn't quite sure what to do about it. All right, he said. He picked up a pen from the desk she'd indicated earlier. He began to write. They worked until the light failed. At some point, Clara lit the lamp and the kitchen fell into the warm, close quiet of lamp-lit rooms, and they moved through the documents without talking much. Her asking the specific questions she needed answered him, answering them occasionally the other way around. He knew the history of the land registration systems the way a person knows something they have paid for personally. Once she asked him directly, "What happened to your family's land?" "We lost it," he said. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." "How long?" He was quiet for a moment. 15 years. "And you've been in the mountains since?" "More or less." She looked at him across the table. "Is that better? The mountains?" He considered this with the same care he applied to the documents. "It's quieter," he said. "People don't expect things from you in the mountains. People don't see you either." He looked up at her. "No," he said. "They don't." She held his gaze for a moment, and then looked back down at the documents. Not because she was uncomfortable, because it seemed like the fair thing to give him back the privacy he'd just accidentally given up. They did not discuss it further. At 9 o'clock he stood up and put on his hat. "I'll need to ride back in the morning to get the letter on the stage," he said. "If you want me to include specific language about the county consolidation, write it down tonight and I'll add it." "I will," she said. He moved toward the door. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. He stopped. "You could stay in the barn," she said. "It's a long ride back to Harlan Creek and a longer ride up to wherever you're working in the Beartooth. The hay's clean and the horses won't bother you." He turned and looked at her. She kept her expression exactly as it was, practical, direct, giving nothing away. "I appreciate that," he said. "It's sensible," she said. "Nothing else." He almost smiled then. She was fairly certain of it. "Good night, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." She did not sleep well, but that was not unusual. She lay in the dark, listening to the summer sounds, the creak, the insects, the occasional shift of horses in the paddock, and she thought about Nathan Caldwell and his forged document, and the particular patience of powerful men who believe that waiting is a form of winning. She thought about the letter they would send to Billings. She thought about the ledger numbers and the seed she hadn't gotten, and the lean-to that needed patching. She thought once about the man sleeping in her barn. Then she put that thought away. In the careful, organized manner she applied to things she wasn't ready to examine, like a document you put in a drawer because you know it's important, but you're not sure yet what it means. In the morning, she rose before the sun. By the time the sky lightened to pale gray, she had coffee on the stove and the specific language about the county consolidation written out in her clearest hand on a separate sheet of paper. She heard him moving in the barn at first light. She heard him talking to the horses in a low, easy voice, the words indistinct through the walls. She did not go out. She put the paper on the table, poured a second cup, and waited. He came in without knocking, which she had not told him to do, but which she found she didn't mind, and stopped when he saw the coffee. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "It's practical," she said again. He sat down. He picked up the paper she'd written. He read it carefully, nodding once. "This is good," he said. "This is very good. You write clearly." "I always have," she said. "Nobody ever expected me to." He looked at her across the table in the early gray light, and there was something in the look, something she didn't have a name for, something old and quiet, and a little like grief, and a little like the opposite of grief. "I'll make sure this gets on the stage today," he said. "I know," she said. And that was the beginning of it. Not the letter, not the documents, not even the forged paper, or Nathan Caldwell's scheme, or the summer that was going to test everything she had built. The beginning was the moment she said, "I know," and meant it. She had not trusted anyone in 11 years. She had not meant to start now. But there are some things that do not ask permission before they begin. Silas Blackwood was not a man who stayed. That was the thing Clara understood about him inside the first 3 days, and it was the thing she held on to like a handrail on a steep staircase, a fact she could use to keep herself upright when her instincts started pulling in a direction she couldn't afford. He had come down from the mountain to sell horses. He had written a letter. He had stayed one night in the barn because riding back to Harlan Creek in the dark was impractical. That was the full accounting of it, and she knew better than to add anything to the ledger that wasn't there. So when she came out to the paddock at first light on the second morning and found him restringing the north fence line, the section she had been putting off for 2 weeks because the post anchors had rotted and she hadn't had the time or the extra hands to reset them, she stood at the paddock gate for a moment and said nothing. He didn't look up. "Post anchors were rotted through," he said. "3 of them. I had spare timber in the wagon from the Harlan Creek livery order. Didn't seem worth leaving it when I could see what you needed." "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He kept working. Clara stood at the gate a moment longer. She was aware that she had a choice here. She could make something of this, say something about charity or obligation, or the way capable people were always underestimated by the people who assumed they needed help. She had made that speech before. She had it ready. She decided not to make it. "Coffee's on," she said. "I'll be in when I'm done," he said. She went back inside and made breakfast for 2 without thinking about it too hard. That was the beginning of the second day, and in the way of things that accumulate quietly, it set the shape of the days that followed. He did not announce that he was staying. Neither did she invite him. The thing simply happened the way it did in working country. There was too much work and not enough hands, and the work did not care about the complexity of human arrangements, and so they worked. He slept in the barn. She cooked. He fixed things she pointed him toward, and occasionally things she hadn't gotten around to pointing at yet. She fed and watered and organized and calculated, and held the whole operation in her head the way she had always held it. He never once suggested she didn't know what she was doing. That was, she found, a remarkable quality in a person. On the third morning, he came in from checking the south fence, the creek-adjacent parcel, with a particular expression. Not alarmed. Careful. "Someone's been at your fence line," he said. Clara set down the iron skillet. "Where?" "Southeast corner. 2 posts pulled and reset at an angle. It's subtle enough you'd only notice if you were looking for it." "Caldwell's men, or someone working for him." He sat down at the table. "If those fence posts are repositioned over time, it shifts the visible boundary of the property. Not by much, not enough to prove anything in a single visit. But by the time any one official comes to look, the fence line doesn't match the survey," Clara said. "Not by the 30 feet that matter most for the water access." She sat down across from him. "How long has this been going on?" "Can't say for certain. The ground shows some old disturbance around the new holes. Could be weeks, could be more." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need a camera." Silas looked at her. "A photographic camera," she said. "If I can document the current fence position against the survey markers and the date on the documentation, that's physical evidence. That's harder to dismiss than my word against Nathan Caldwell's word." She met his eyes. "Does your surveyor friend in Billings have any connection to someone with a camera?" He watched her for a moment in the way he had, like he was adjusting a calculation in his head. "He might," Silas said. "I can add it to the correspondence." "Do that," she said. She stood up and went back to the stove. After a moment, she said without turning around, "You noticed the fence posts?" "I was looking," he said. "You were looking for something wrong." "I was looking at the property," he said. "It's what I do when I'm in a place." "Is that a mountain habit?" "Survival habit," he said. "From before the mountain." She didn't ask what that meant. She could hear in the way he said it that it was one of those sentences that opens a door but doesn't invite you through. She had sentences like that herself. She respected them in other people. She served the eggs, and they ate without speaking much, and outside the summer heat was building already at 7 in the morning, and the horses were restless in the paddock, and in the distance the creek ran where it had always run on land that was hers, that she intended to keep. The letter from Billings arrived 11 days after Silas had put it on the stage. Clara knew it was coming because she had calculated the transit time and had driven to the Harlan Creek post office on the appropriate morning, not waiting, just knowing. She picked up the envelope and read it standing at the post office counter without any ceremony. And the clerk watched her with an expression that was curiosity trying to dress itself up as indifference. The letter was from a man named Edmund Reach, retired territorial surveyor, written in the cramped, careful hand of someone who trusted words to do their exact work and no more. He had reviewed the information Silas had provided. He confirmed the county consolidation issue. He said he had a colleague, a junior land recorder currently employed in the Billings territorial office, who had access to the original registration ledgers from the 1860s, and that colleague was, as of this letter, already looking at the Whitmore file. He also confirmed that he knew someone with a camera. And then, at the bottom of the letter, Edmund Reach had written, "Silas Blackwood is a man whose word I would take to any court in this territory. If he says the situation warrants attention, it warrants attention." Clara folded the letter. She put it in her pocket. She drove back to the ranch without stopping, and when she walked into the barn where Silas was working on the saddle harness she'd asked him to repair, she handed him the letter without explanation. He read it. He handed it back. "Good," he said. "He says he respects your word," Clara said. "Ed's a fair man. He clearly thinks well of you." Silas went back to the harness. "We worked together on a claim dispute, 10 years ago, roughly." "Your family's dispute." A pause. "Adjacent to it." She didn't push. But she looked at him for a moment. This man who had lost something significant and carried it quietly, and still knew who in Billings could be trusted, and still noticed rotting fence posts, and still came down from the mountain at the right moment, for reasons he probably hadn't fully articulated to himself. She went back to the house. She wrote to Edmund Reach that afternoon, formally and specifically laying out the full documentation case in the clearest language she had. She was a thorough woman. She always had been. Nobody had ever told her it was a virtue, but she had never needed to be told. It was near the end of the second week that Nathan Caldwell himself came to the ranch. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. Two riders well-mounted coming up the north track at a pace that announced itself without rushing. She was in the kitchen when she heard them, and she did two things before she went to the door. She put the ledger in the cabinet, and she did not pick up the rifle. She had thought about that choice. She made it deliberately. Nathan Caldwell did not deserve to see the rifle. He deserved to see her standing in a doorway with nothing but her own certainty, which was more than he had earned. Nathan Caldwell was 52 years old and well-fed, and had the particular confidence of a man who had been agreeable with his money for long enough that he had confused agreeableness with virtue. He had thick gray sideburns and a good coat and a smile that arrived a full second before his eyes decided whether it was warranted. "Clara," he said. He always used her first name. It was a small thing, but she had noticed it 11 years ago and had never forgiven it. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," she said, "but you knew that before you came." His smile held. "I wanted to talk directly, man to man, so to speak." "So to speak," she said. He dismounted and handed his reins to the rider beside him, a young man she didn't recognize without looking at him. That was how Nathan Caldwell treated the people who worked for him, like furniture that moved on its own. "I've heard you've been making inquiries," he said, "about the title situation." "I've been documenting the fraud in your title claim," she said. "That's different from inquiries." His smile didn't waver. "That's a serious word." "It's the accurate word." He looked past her toward the ranch. "You know, Clara, I've always had a genuine respect for what you've done here. Truly. A woman running a spread like this alone, it's remarkable. But remarkable effort doesn't make a thing sustainable. You're spread thin. You know it. I know it. The question isn't whether this land gets sold eventually. The question is who it gets sold to and under what circumstances." "It won't be sold to you," she said. "The document is forged," she said. "The county seal is wrong. The notary jurisdiction is wrong. And Edmund Reach of the Billings Territorial Surveyor's Office is currently reviewing your filing against the original 1861 registration ledgers." She looked at him steadily. "I expect to hear back from him within the week." Something moved through Nathan Caldwell's expression then. It was fast gone before it had fully arrived, but she had been watching for it and she caught it. It was the look of a man recalculating. "I'd encourage you," he said, his voice taking on the gentle tone of someone pretending to be reasonable, "to consider the practical position you're in. The seed situation. The credit issue at Doyle's. These are real pressures. I can resolve both of them today right now with a fair purchase offer for the south parcel alone. Just the south parcel. You'd keep the ranch. Without the water source," she said. "You'd have access rights. Rights that you would control," she said. "The way a landlord controls a tenant. No. Clara, you'll address me as Mrs. Whitmore," she said. The pretend reasonable expression cracked just at the edges. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I'm trying to be civil about this." "You're trying to buy something I won't sell," she said. "Civil is just the first tactic. I'd encourage you to save us both the time and not proceed through the other ones." Nathan Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her again, and this time there was something different in it. Something that made Clara want to turn around, but she didn't, because turning your back to see what was behind you was the kind of move that told a man he had made you uncertain. "You have help now," Nathan said. "I heard there's a man on the property." "I have a hand helping with fence repairs," she said. "Silas Blackwood," Nathan said. "Comes down from the Beartooth every few years to sell horses and disappear again. You know why he stays up there?" "I know it's none of your business," she said. "Just interesting company for a woman who's always preferred to work alone." He settled his hat. "The offer stands, Mrs. Whitmore, for 30 days. After that, the legal process takes its own shape, and I can't promise the terms stay as generous." "Good day, Mr. Caldwell," she said. He rode away. She stood on the porch until she couldn't hear the horses anymore. Then she turned around. Silas was standing at the corner of the barn. He had clearly been there long enough to hear most of it, and he made no pretense otherwise. He looked at her across the yard. "You didn't tell me Edmund's reply had arrived," he said. "I was getting around to it," she said. He nodded slowly. "You handled that well," he said. "I've had practice," she said. And then, because she was still thinking about what Nathan Caldwell had said and the way he'd said it. "He said something about you. Why you stay in the mountains." Silas came across the yard toward her. He stopped at the porch steps. "What did he say?" His voice was easy. Too easy, the kind of easy that is chosen. "He implied there was a reason," she said. "Something that would explain why you come down once every few years and no more." Silas was quiet for a moment. "There is a reason," he said. She waited. "I had a family," he said. "Wife, 2 daughters. We were ranching in the southern Beartooth, smaller spread than this, but it was ours. The winter of 1873 was bad. You probably remember it." "I remember it," she said. The winter of 1873 had killed half the cattle in the territory, and a significant portion of the people who depended on them. "Fever came with the cold," he said. "I was out checking stock when it hit the house. I was gone 2 days. When I came back—" He stopped. He started again. "I came back and there was nothing I could do. My daughters were 9 and 6. Clara didn't say anything. Sometimes the only thing to say was nothing. "After that," he said, "I couldn't be in places where people expected me to be a particular kind of person. The mountains don't expect anything. You just exist in them." "I understand that," she said quietly. "I know you do," he said, and looked at her in a way that said he meant it exactly. She looked away first, not because it was uncomfortable, because it was the opposite of that, and she was not ready for the opposite of that. "I'm going to write to the Billings Territorial Office directly," she said. "Not just through Edmund. A formal filing of the fraud claim with the evidence I have. I need to do it this week before Caldwell can move any pieces I don't know about." "I can ride with you," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "I know." She looked at him. "All right," she said. "We leave Thursday." The ride to Billings took 2 days. Clara had made it before, but always alone, and there was a specific kind of strangeness to making a familiar journey with another person. The road looked the same, and the time passed differently. Silas was not a man who talked to fill silence, which meant that when he did say something, it was because it was worth saying. She found she kept listening for it. They camped the first night on the open range, a fire small against the July dark, and the horses were picketed, and the sky was enormous and clear, the way it only is at altitude. And Clara drank her coffee and thought about everything she was riding toward, and tried not to think about what might happen if the Billings filing didn't hold. "What's your alternative plan?" Silas said. She looked at him across the fire. "What do you mean? If the filing doesn't produce results fast enough? Caldwell moves on the fence line, shifts the visible boundary, brings in his own surveyor before yours gets to it. What do you do?" Clara had thought about this. She had thought about it the way she thought about bad weather, by looking at it directly and not making it smaller than it was. "I have documentation of the current fence position," she said. "I marked the survey stakes myself last week. If the fence moves, I have evidence it moved." "Can you get a witness?" "Someone from town who isn't Caldwell's." "Hicks," she said. "He was my father's friend once. He's been avoiding me for years because it's easier, but I don't think he's dishonest. Just careful." "Careful men can be moved," Silas said. "If the right thing to do is clear enough," Clara said. "Most people don't choose wrong because they're bad. They choose it because being good is inconvenient, and nobody's made the inconvenience worth their while yet." Silas considered this. "That's either very charitable or very practical." "It's both," she said. "I've had to be both." He looked at her across the fire. "You've been fighting this a long time," he said. "Not as a question. I've been fighting most things a long time," she said. "Why do you stay?" he said. "You could sell the grazing land not to Caldwell to someone else and go somewhere easier." She was quiet for a moment. "My father is buried on that land," she said. "My husband is buried on that land. Everything I've ever built, that I didn't have to build twice, is on that land." She looked at the fire. I'm not sentimental. I know land is land. But that particular piece of land is the one place in my life where I decided what happened. Where I ran the numbers and made the choices and did the work and the outcome matched what I'd decided. Everywhere else things happened to me. She paused. I'm not giving up the one place I happened to. Silas didn't respond right away. When he did, it was quiet. That's the best reason I've ever heard for keeping anything. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. She put her coffee cup down and said goodnight and lay down in her bedroll and looked at the stars for a long time before she slept. The Billings Territorial Office was a limestone building on the main street that smelled like dust and paper and the particular institutional weight of permanent record-keeping. Clara walked in with her documentation in a leather satchel, and Silas walked in beside her and the clerk at the front desk, a young man with round spectacles who clearly expected this Tuesday morning to be uneventful, looked up and recalibrated. She stated her business precisely. She placed the documents on the counter in the order she had organized them. She named the specific claim number for her father's 1861 registration and the specific index for the water rights filing and the nature of the discrepancy she was alleging. The clerk went to get his supervisor. The supervisor was a woman named Agnes Hartley, which Clara had not expected and which made her feel something she tried not to show on her face, something between relief and recognition. Agnes Hartley was 55, wore no jewelry, had the expression of someone who had spent 3 decades watching men try to obscure the obvious in paperwork, and immediately looked at the county seal discrepancy, the way a doctor looks at a known symptom. Stillwater registration, Agnes said. Douglas seal, notarized after the county consolidation, but dated before it. She looked up. This is a significant problem for whoever filed it. Nathan Caldwell, Clara said. Harlan Creek area. He is currently in possession of this document and has submitted it as grounds for a title dispute on my south parcel. Agnes looked at Silas. And you are? Here with Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Agnes looked back at Clara. You have the original registration. I have a certified copy. The original is in my family's possession. She placed it on the desk. I also have correspondence with Edmund Reach, who has been reviewing the 1861 ledger records for the relevant entry. Agnes Hartley picked up the correspondence. She read it with the focus of someone who reads documents the way other people breathe automatically and thoroughly. Mr. Reach is known to this office, she said. I'm aware, Clara said. Agnes set the correspondence down. She looked at Clara with the measuring look of a woman who has dealt with other women who came in alone and angry and occasionally wrong. You understand that a finding of fraudulent documentation requires a formal review process, Agnes said. I cannot simply stamp this resolved today. I understand, Clara said. I'm here to file the formal complaint and establish my documentation priority. I want this on the record before Mr. Caldwell can produce a counterfiling or modify the physical evidence on the ground. Agnes paused. You're worried about the physical evidence, she said. His men have been repositioning my fence posts, Clara said. Southeast corner creek adjacent parcel. I have marked the survey stakes and dated my own documentation. But the sooner your office has my formal complaint on record, the sooner any subsequent changes to the physical property become legally relevant. Agnes Hartley looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled a fresh filing form from the drawer beneath the counter. Tell me everything, she said. Start with the 1861 registration and leave nothing out. Clara told her everything. It took 40 minutes. At the end of it, Agnes stamped the filing, signed it, and placed it in the official record ledger, with the date marked in 3 places. She also, without being asked, wrote a short memorandum to the county surveyor's office in Harlan Creek, directing them to conduct a property boundary inspection on the Whitmore South parcel within 30 days. When they walked back out into the Billings Street, into the bright July heat, Clara stood on the limestone steps and felt the particular feeling of having put something into the record that could not be taken back. Silas stood beside her. How do you feel? He said. Like I'd like to do that 6 weeks ago, she said. He almost smiled. What made you wait? I didn't know about the county seal, she said. Without that, I had a land dispute. With it, I have a fraud case. Those are different things. She looked at him. You gave me that. You were already halfway there, he said. Halfway isn't enough, she said. It's never been enough. She picked up her satchel. I'd like to stop and see Edmund Reach before we start back. His office is 2 streets north, Silas said. She looked at him. I know where Ed works, he said simply. They walked 2 streets north. Edmund Reach was a small man with enormous hands, which had always been in Silas's experience a combination that went together. He grabbed Silas by the shoulder when they walked in and made the kind of noise men make when they haven't seen someone in too long and don't quite know how to say it. Silas Blackwood, he said. Mountain's given you back. Temporarily, Silas said. Always temporarily. Edmund looked at Clara. And you must be Mrs. Whitmore. I am, she said. I expected you to be frightened, he said. You don't look frightened. I'm not, she said. Good. He shook her hand. I reviewed the 1861 ledger entry 2 days ago. Your father's registration is precisely what you described, and the Caldwell filing is precisely what Silas described. My colleague at the territorial office, young man named Porter Sharp as attack, has already flagged it in the internal review system. He looked at her over his spectacles. I don't want to promise outcomes I can't deliver, Mrs. Whitmore. But I will tell you that the documentation picture is very clear, clearer than most cases I've seen. Will it be clear enough to resolve before Caldwell can do more damage on the ground? Clara asked. Edmund was quiet for a moment. That depends on how quickly they can conduct the boundary inspection. The Hartley woman issued a memorandum today, Clara said. Directed the Harlan Creek County surveyor to inspect within 30 days. Edmund raised his eyebrows. He looked at Silas. Agnes Hartley, Silas said. Well, Edmund said. Then you may be all right. Clara nodded. She picked up her satchel. Thank you, Mr. Reach, she said. For the letter. For the review. For your colleague's attention. Don't thank me, Edmund said. Thank Silas for knowing who to write to. He looked at Silas again, and there was something in it, an old affection, and underneath it, something careful. You staying down this time? I don't know, Silas said. Edmund nodded like he understood, which probably meant he did. They rode back the way they had come, and the second night on the open range was warmer than the first, the summer pressing. Everything closer, and they talked less and were quiet in a different way. The way of people who have done something together that mattered, and are sitting in the aftermath of it, and finding that the aftermath is easier than expected. At one point, Clara said, He asked if you were staying. Ed asks everything, Silas said. But you don't know, she said. How was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I don't know. She looked at the fire. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that she had spent 11 years being certain of her own aloneness. Not happily certain, but certain. The way you are certain about the weather, and the certainty had stopped being comfortable somewhere around the time a man in a worn leather vest had pulled a chair up beside her and said something about people mistaking kindness for weakness. She didn't say any of that. She said, the stars are different at altitude. Yes, Silas said. I've noticed that every time I come down. The sky looks lower. It is lower, he said. Or you are. She looked at him. He was looking up. She looked up too. The fire burned down, and neither of them moved to add to it, and the dark came full and quiet around them, and in the morning they broke camp in the cold pre-dawn and rode north toward Harlan Creek and the Whitmore Ranch, and everything that was still waiting to be settled, because things do not settle themselves, not in Montana in the summer of 1884. Not when a man like Nathan Caldwell has put his money and his patience against a woman who has never in her life stopped standing. But for those hours on the open range in the dark, and the fire warmth, and the altitude-lowered sky, something was building between them that neither of them had named yet. Not because they didn't feel it, because some things named too early break before they can hold weight. And both of them knew, in the particular way of people who have lost things they loved, that this was not something either of them could afford to break. They came back to the ranch on a Friday afternoon to find the south gate standing open. Clara saw it before the horses turned into the north track, that specific wrongness of a gate that is always closed, standing wide. She didn't say anything. She urged the mare forward, and Silas came up beside her without being asked, and they rode in together. The gate wasn't broken. The latch was undone, deliberate and clean. Someone had opened it and left it open, which was worse than breaking it, because breaking it would have been anger. This was a message. This was someone telling her they could walk onto her land whenever they chose, and they wanted her to know it. Clara dismounted and latched the gate herself. She did not look at Silas. "Check the south fence," she said. He rode south. She took the horses to the barn, unsaddled, both watered them, and walked to the house. She needed to look at the interior, needed to know if they'd come inside, and she needed to do it alone, because there was a particular kind of violation that she could only process without witnesses. The house was untouched. Everything exactly where she'd left it. The ledger in the cabinet, the documents in the locked box under the floorboard, the kitchen exactly as she'd left it. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and breathed. Then she walked back out. Silas came back from the south fence line 20 minutes later. She could read his expression from 50 yards. "How bad?" she said. "They moved 4 posts," he said. "Southeast corner, same section as before. But further this time, 8 feet on 2 of them, maybe 10 on the others. They also pulled the survey stakes I watched you set last week." Clara felt something cold move through her chest. All of them. 2 of the 4. The other 2 were still there but repositioned. She was quiet for a moment. "I marked the original positions in the ledger," she said. "Measurements from the barn corner and the creek bend. I have the numbers." "That'll help," he said. "But without the physical stakes." "Without the physical stakes, it's my word against a repositioned fence," she said. "Yes." She sat down on the porch step. This was not despair, she knew. Despair had lived in its particular weather before, and this wasn't it. This was the feeling of a person who has prepared thoroughly and is now watching someone move the board between moves. "He knew we went to Billings," she said. "Someone in town told him. Someone always tells him," she said. "That's how it works here. Nathan Caldwell has been the richest man in this valley for 20 years. People don't inform on him, they just tell him things because it's easier than not." She looked at the sky. "He's accelerating because he knows I filed. He's trying to change the physical reality faster than the inspection can document it." "Then we need to reset the stakes tonight," Silas said, "before anything else moves." Clara looked at him. "I have the measurements," she said. "And I have a surveyor's compass in the saddlebag," he said. "Old one but accurate." She stared at him. "Why do you have a surveyor's compass?" Something passed through his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite pain. "Same reason I know county registration history," he said. She understood. She didn't push. "We have 3 hours of light," she said. "Then let's stop talking," he said. They worked the south fence line until the light was gone, and then by lantern Clara calling measurements from the ledger, and Silas driving stakes with the systematic precision of someone who had done this before and understood exactly what was at stake if a single number was wrong. She had never worked alongside someone who matched her pace without being asked who moved to the next task, without checking whether she approved of the sequence. It should have bothered her, that fluency. It didn't. At some point he said without stopping work, "You're angry." "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "Stay angry. Anger is better than afraid." "I'm not afraid either," she said. He drove in the last stake and stood up. "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant." She held the lantern up to check the alignment. The light caught the stake at the exact measurement she'd recorded, matched to the inch. "Good," she said. "What do we do tomorrow?" he said. "Tomorrow I write to Agnes Hartley," she said. "Tell her the physical evidence has been disturbed since the filing. Ask if the inspection can be moved forward." She handed him the lantern and closed the ledger. "And I go see Hicks." "The careful man," Silas said. "He was my father's friend," she said. "He watched what happened in Doyle's trading post 3 weeks ago. He was one of the people who said nothing." She looked north toward the ranch house. "I think that's been sitting on him. You think he'll speak?" I think he'll speak if someone shows him clearly that the cost of not speaking is higher than the cost of speaking, she said. He's not a bad man. He's a man who has been choosing the easier thing for so long that he's almost forgotten there's a harder thing available. Silas was quiet. You sound like you've known a lot of men like that, he said. I've known a lot of everyone like that, she said. I've had time to think about why. They walked back up to the ranch house in the dark, the lantern swinging between them, the summer night pressing in warm and close and alive with sound. At the porch steps, she stopped. Silas, she said. He stopped beside her. What Nathan said in Billings that he's filing a counter-response. If he has a second document. Then the fraud case gets more complicated, Silas said. A second forged document doesn't disprove the first forgery, but it muddies the water. Exactly, she said. Which means the inspection and Edmund's formal findings need to happen before he can manufacture more paper. She looked at him. How fast can you get a message to Edmund directly, not through the post directly? He was quiet a moment. I could ride to Billings, he said. 4 days round trip if I push. That's 4 days away from this property, she said. Yes. She thought about the open gate, about the repositioned fence posts, about the 2 pulled survey stakes. I'll handle it from here, she said. I'll write Edmund through the fast post. It'll cost more. I can contribute. No, she said, firmly, but not unkindly. This is my land. The costs are mine. He looked at her in the lantern light. Clara, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name without her inviting it. Neither of them moved to acknowledge that. Mr. Blackwood, she said, steady. You don't have to do all of it alone, he said. Accepting help isn't the same as giving up ground. I know that, she said. Do you? She held his gaze. I know it because you showed me, she said. Which is why I'm telling you I'll write the letters. You keep watching the fence line. It wasn't a dismissal. He received it correctly as the division of labor between 2 people who have decided to trust each other, which is different from dependence and also different from isolation. Something in between that doesn't have an easy name. Good night, he said. Good night, she said. She went inside. She wrote 4 letters before she slept. Hicks lived 3 miles east in a house that had started as a cabin and been added onto every decade without much plan, so that it looked like a building that had agreed to contain multiple arguments at once. His wife had died 8 years ago. He had 2 grown sons somewhere in Wyoming. He kept chickens and a small herd of cattle, and a reputation for knowing which way the wind blew before it blew. Clara rode out alone the next morning. She had not told Silas where she was going, which was not dishonesty. It was the particular privacy of a woman who has always done her own negotiating and is not ready to share the table. Hicks was splitting wood at the side of the house when she rode up. He stopped when he saw her and set the axe down in that careful way of a man who wants his hands visible. Clara, he said. Mr. Hicks, she said. She dismounted and tied the horse without being invited. Been a while, he said. 3 years, she said. Since you came to fix the water pump and stayed for supper. You told me a story about my father that I hadn't heard before. She looked at him directly. About how he helped you when your wife was sick. Rode to town in the middle of a January storm to get the medicine because your roads were iced over. Hicks looked at the ground. He was a good man, he said. I was, she said. He also spent a considerable amount of that December telling people that Casper Hicks was a man of character, and that anyone who said otherwise was wrong. She paused. He believed that about you. Hicks picked up the axe again. Set it back down. What do you want, Clara? Mrs. Whitmore, she said. He looked up. What do you want, Mrs. Whitmore? He said. Quieter. I want you to come to the county inspection of my south fence line, she said. As a witness, I want you to state under record that you knew my father, that you knew the land's history, and that you observed the Harlan Creek community's treatment of my family's title over the past 11 years. She held his gaze. I want you to tell the truth. Hicks was quiet for a long moment. Nathan Caldwell. Nathan Caldwell. Nathan Caldwell forged a land document, she said. His men have been repositioning my fence posts for weeks. The territorial office in Billings has my formal fraud complaint on record as of 4 days ago. She let that sit a moment. I'm not asking you to fight Nathan Caldwell. I'm asking you to tell an inspector what you know to be true. That's the same thing, he said. No, she said. It isn't. Fighting Nathan Caldwell is a choice. Telling the truth is just telling the truth. The outcome might be the same, but you have to decide which one you can live with. Hicks looked at her for a long time. You sound like your father, he said. Good, she said. He was stubborn too, Hicks said. Nearly got him killed 3 times. The 3 times didn't kill him, she said. The fever did, and he died on his own land, which is what he wanted. She picked up her reins. I intend to do the same. She mounted. The inspection could be any day in the next 3 weeks, she said. I'll send word when I know the date. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm asking you to think about what my father would have wanted you to do. She rode away. She didn't look back, but she had ridden 2 miles when she heard hoofbeats behind her, and she turned, and it was Hicks on his old roan no saddle, just a blanket riding to catch up. I don't need 3 weeks, he said when he pulled alongside. She looked at him. Your father was the best man I knew in 40 years of knowing men, he said. I've been telling myself I was staying out of your business for practical reasons. That's a lie. I've been staying out because it was easier. He looked straight ahead. I'll come to the inspection. I'll say what I know. Clara held the reins steady. Thank you, Casper, she said. Using his given name, which she hadn't used in years, and which was the only thing she had that equaled what he'd just given her. He nodded once. He turned his roan around and rode back. Clara rode north toward the Whitmore ranch with the particular feeling of a woman who has just watched the tide begin to turn, not safely, not conclusively, but begin, and who understands that a beginning is everything. The letter from Agnes Hartley arrived 6 days later, and it was not what Clara expected. It was not bad news, not exactly, but it was the kind of news that rearranges the board significantly. Nathan Caldwell had filed a counter-complaint with the territorial office. Not just a response to her fraud allegation, a formal counterclaim asserting that the 1861 Whitmore registration itself was in error, that the original survey had misdescribed the parcel boundaries, and that the Whitmore family had, whether knowingly or not, been operating a ranch that included land that had never legally been theirs. Agnes Hartley's letter was careful and precise, and said in the language of someone who has seen things go in many directions. This counterfiling does not invalidate your complaint. However, it does mean the review process will involve a more comprehensive examination of both registration histories, which may extend the timeline. I am forwarding everything to the Territorial Land Commission for expedited review. In the meantime, the boundary inspection will proceed as scheduled the week of August 12th. Clara read the letter standing at the kitchen table. Silas was sitting across from her eating breakfast, watching her face. She set the letter down. He filed a counter-complaint, she said. Silas set down his fork. She told him what it said. All of it, precise and level. When she finished, Silas was quiet for a long moment. He's smart, he said. He's desperate, she said. There's a difference. Smart people make precise moves. Desperate people make expensive moves and hope the expense is intimidating enough that the other side stops. She folded the letter. He's trying to make this too complicated and too costly for me to sustain. And is it? Silas said. She looked at him directly. No. The comprehensive review takes longer, he said. What does longer mean for the ranch? 3 more weeks of restricted credit at Doyle's, she said. Maybe 4. I have enough to manage if I sell 2 of the older cattle before August. She put the letter in the cabinet with the others. But there's something else in this. She sat down. If he's claiming the original 1861 survey misdescribed the parcel, she said, he needs a historical document to support that claim. Either he has one, which means he's had it for a while and has been waiting for the right moment to use it, or he's manufacturing one right now. She looked at Silas. Which kind do you think it is? Silas thought about it. He moved fast after you filed in billings. If he already had the document, he would have used it earlier in the first offer or when he filed the title dispute. Using it now as a counter-move suggests it's new. New means manufactured, she said. Yes. Then Edmund needs to know immediately, she said. If Nathan Caldwell is creating a second forged historical document, and if we can show the pattern first, the purchase agreement. Now a survey error claim, that's not just fraud. That's a sustained conspiracy to defraud. She picked up the pen. That changes the legal weight considerably. Silas watched her. You already knew this was going to get worse before it got better, he said. I've known that since the first forged paper, she said. A man like Nathan Caldwell doesn't start with forgery unless he's already exhausted his legitimate options. He's been at the legitimate options for 3 years. This is his last play. She looked up from the paper. Which means he's more dangerous right now than he's ever been. Cornered men are. Yes, Silas said. They are. He said it with the weight of a man who knows this from somewhere personal, and Clara heard that weight and did not ask because she was already writing the letter to Edmund. 3 days before the boundary inspection. Nathan Caldwell made a move that none of them had anticipated. He went to see Doyle Marsh. And after he left, Doyle Marsh came to the Whitmore ranch. Clara saw the wagon from the barn, recognized the distinctive broad shape of Doyle's shoulders, and the way he drove with the reins held too loosely, like a man who doesn't entirely trust where he's going. She came out to the yard. Doyle, she said. He stopped the wagon and sat there for a moment without getting down, which told her this was not comfortable for him. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. I need to tell you something. Get down and say it properly, she said. He climbed down from the wagon. He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she recognized from the people who had done her the favor of being human about the difficult things they had to say. Nathan came to see me yesterday, Doyle said. He told me about the counterfiling. He also told me, he stopped. He told me that if I resumed your credit and reissued your seed order, he'd pull his family's account from the trading post. His whole family extended included. That's nearly 40% of my monthly trade. Clara looked at him steadily. I know what I did, Doyle said. Cutting you off in the first place. I know it wasn't right. I told myself it was just business, and that's well. It wasn't just business. He looked at his hat. But this is me telling you directly, instead of just letting it happen again. He made the threat. I wanted you to know he made it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me? She said. Because your father was decent to my family when we first came to this valley, he said. And because I've watched what Nathan's done to you for 3 years, and I've been telling myself it wasn't my business, and I'm tired of telling myself that. He looked up. I don't know what I'm going to do about the account. I don't know if I'm brave enough, but I know you should have the information. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, he's telling you about the counterfiling because he wants you to think he's winning. He's telling you about the account threat because he needs you afraid. Men don't threaten things they're already certain of. Doyle blinked. He's not as certain as he looks, she said. And by the time the boundary inspection happens, he's going to be less certain still. I'm not asking you to choose sides today, Doyle. I'm telling you that when the time comes to choose, and it will come, the side you choose is going to be on the record. She turned back toward the barn. Mrs. Whitmore, Doyle said. She stopped. The seed order is ready, he said. It's been sitting since July. I'll deliver it tomorrow. She turned around. He looked uncomfortable, but resolute in the way of a man who has made a decision he's going to have to live with. You'll want to factor that into whatever calculation you're making, he said. I will, she said. Thank you, Doyle. He nodded once, climbed back on the wagon, and drove away. She stood in the yard and watched him go, and when she turned around, Silas was standing at the barn door. You heard? She said. Some of it, he said. She told him the rest. I was quiet for a moment. People are starting to move, he said. They were always going to, she said. They just needed to believe she could win first. She looked at him. That's the thing about being a woman fighting alone. People don't join you until they think you can win, so you have to act like you can win before you know for certain. Is that what you've been doing? She looked at him directly. Since the day you sat beside me at that trading post, she said. Yes. Something shifted in his expression. That particular shift that happens when a person hears something true about themselves they weren't expecting. I sat in a chair, he said. You sat in a chair in front of 40 people who had decided the chair was empty, she said. That's not a small thing. He looked at her for a long moment. Clara, he said. I know, she said. Not knowing exactly what he meant, but knowing the shape of it. She walked past him into the barn. The night before the boundary inspection, someone set fire to the south lean-to. Not the house, not the barn. The lean-to, the outbuilding at the south end of the property 40 yards from the creek, a structure she had been meaning to repair all summer. Empty. No animals inside. She smelled it before she saw it. She came off the porch in her nightclothes, and by the time she reached the yard, it was already burning a low, fast burn. The old patched canvas and dry timber taking it greedily. Silas was out of the barn in 30 seconds, and they worked the water line from the pump together, and the lean-to was already mostly gone by the time they had enough water to stop it spreading. They stood together in the dark, breathing hard, looking at the charred remains. Clara had ash on her hands and her face and her nightgown, and she stood very still. He's trying to terrify you, Silas said. I know, she said. It's separate from the legal case. He can't affect the inspection by burning an outbuilding. The stakes are set. The documentation is in Billings. Edmund has everything. I know, she said again. Then why do you look like that? He said. She looked at him. Because I'm tired, she said. It came out plainly, not as complaint, not as weakness, just as a true statement of fact. Not of fighting, of being someone that someone else wants to break. I am tired of being a problem that a powerful man needs to solve. Her voice stayed level. I have been tired of it for 11 years. That's allowed. Yes, he said. It is. He said it without flinching from it, without trying to put something more useful in its place, without telling her to stay angry, or stay strong, or any of the things people say when they're uncomfortable with another person's exhaustion. He just said, yes, it is. And something in Clara, that had been held very tight for a very long time, moved a fraction. Not broke, not released, just moved the way a closed hand uncurls one finger at a time. We need to document the fire, she said. Yes, he said. Tonight before anything changes. I'll get the lantern and the ledger. I'll check the perimeter, he said. Make sure no one's still on the property. She went inside and came back with the lantern and the ledger, and they worked through the rest of the night, her documenting him, checking both of them, moving with the focused efficiency of people who have run out of space to be frightened and are operating on something past it. Something that has no name in ordinary life, but shows up when the ordinary options are gone. At 4 a.m, she sat down on the ground beside the charred remains and opened the ledger and made the final notation. Silas sat down beside her. Not across from her. Beside. There's something I need to tell you, he said. She waited. When I said I came down from the mountain to sell horses, he said. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. He looked at his hands. I'd heard about the situation. From a man I trade with, sometimes a trapper who comes through Harlan Creek in spring. He mentioned Nathan Caldwell and the title dispute, and a woman running a ranch alone, who everyone in town had decided was too difficult to help. He paused. I didn't plan to get involved. I wasn't going to. I rode into Harlan Creek with 2 horses, and that was supposed to be the whole of it. Clara looked at him. Then you walked into the trading post, she said. Then you walked into the trading post, he said. And I watched a room full of people decide not to see you. And He stopped. I couldn't do that. I tried. I sat in that chair and told myself it wasn't my business, and I sat there for the full length of that conversation, and I could not make myself agree that it wasn't my business. Clara held the lantern between them. Why? She said. Because my wife was a woman who fought for things alone, he said, for years before I met her, and I watched the world treat that quality in her the way it treats that quality in most women as a character flaw instead of a virtue. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. She died on land she had poured everything into, and half the county came to the burial to express condolences. They hadn't offered when she was alive, and it was too late to say what I should have said to all of them, which was that she was worth more than any of them ever saw. The fire was completely out now. The summer night was enormous and quiet. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have found you very funny, actually." Clara looked at him. "Funny," she said. "The way you said Mrs. Whitmore to Nathan Caldwell," he said. "She had a tone like that. Could say 3 words and make a man feel he'd failed at something significant." Clara felt something unexpected move through her. Something warm. Something almost amused here in the ashes, at 4 in the morning, after a night of fire and exhaustion, and years of accumulated weight. "I'm sorry you lost her," she said. "I'm sorry you lost what you lost," he said. They sat beside the charred lean-to in the dark, and the summer night held them in its enormous, indifferent hands, and between them was everything that had been accumulating since a man in a worn leather vest pulled a chair up beside a woman. Nobody saw accumulating quietly, stubbornly, with the particular insistence of things that intend to hold. In 5 hours, the county inspector was going to arrive at the Whitmore ranch, and Nathan Caldwell, who had been the most powerful man in this valley for 20 years, was about to find out what happened when a tired woman stopped being alone. The county inspector arrived at 7 in the morning, earlier than Clara had expected, which told her Agnes Hartley had made a specific request about timing. His name was Roy Fenwick, and he was a lean, sun-hardened man of about 50, who carried a brass surveying instrument and a leather case full of documents, and had the air of someone who had been lied to by enough important people to have stopped being impressed by them. He shook Clara's hand with the same firmness he gave. Silas looked at the charred remains of the lean-to without commenting and said, "Show me the south fence line, Mrs. Whitmore." She showed him. She walked him through every stake, every measurement, every notation in the ledger with the same precise clarity she had used in the Billings Territorial Office. She showed him the holes where the original stakes had been pulled. She showed him the repositioned fence posts and the disturbed ground around them. She read him the measurements she had recorded before they left for Billings, and she read him the measurements she had retaken when they returned. Roy Fenwick took his own measurements. He took them twice. He wrote everything in his own ledger without speaking. When he was done with the fence line, he looked at the creek. "This water source," he said. "It's been in continuous use by the Whitmore Ranch." "Since 1861, Clara said. "My father built the first irrigation channel from this creek in the summer of that year. I have his original survey notes documenting it." "I'd like to see those." She went to the house and came back with them. Fenwick read them the way he had read everything else, without hurry, without expression, without giving anything away. Silas stood to the side of all of this, present, but not speaking in the particular way of a man who understands that his role in this moment is to witness rather than to act. Clara was aware of him the way she was aware of the creek, consistently, without having to look. After 2 hours, Fenwick said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to tell you something directly." She held his gaze. "Go ahead." "The Caldwell counterfiling contains a historical survey document that I've been asked to evaluate as part of this inspection." He opened his leather case and produced a folded paper. "I'd like you to look at it and tell me if you've seen it before." She took the paper. She unfolded it. It was a survey document dated 1859, 2 years before her father's registration. It purported to show a different original boundary for the South Parcel 1 that placed the creek outside the Whitmore land and within a prior claim belonging to a family named Alderson. Clara read it carefully. Then she read it again. "I've never seen this document," she said. "You're certain?" "My father's papers are thorough," she said. "If a prior claim had existed on the South Parcel, it would have come up in the 1861 registration process. It would be in the territorial filing records." She looked up. "Is it?" Fenwick paused. "That's one of the questions the Land Commission is investigating." "Is there a record of the Alderson family in this county?" she said. Another pause. Longer. "No," he said. Clara handed the document back to him. "Then I would suggest the Land Commission investigate whether the Alderson family existed at all," she said. Because if they didn't, then this document names a prior claimant who never existed, which would make it not just a forgery, but a particularly reckless one. Fenwick looked at her. He looked at the document. He put it back in his case with the particular care of a man who has just understood something he hadn't walked in expecting to understand. "I'll note your response in my report," he said. "Please do," she said. Casper Hicks arrived an hour after Fenwick, which was exactly when Clara had told him to come. She had not told him about the fire. He saw the lean-to remains when he rode in, and his jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything about it, which was exactly the right response. She introduced him to Fenwick. "Mr. Hicks has been a landowner in this valley for 30 years, she said. "He was acquainted with my father during the original registration period." Fenwick looked at Hicks. "You have knowledge of the original Whitmore land claim." "I do," Hicks said. He had dressed for this. Clara noticed his good coat, his clean hat. He was treating this with the formality it deserved. "I was present when Oliver Whitmore drove the first stakes on this property in the spring of 1861. I helped him carry the survey equipment from the wagon." He paused. "There was no prior claim on this land. The south parcel was open range when Oliver took it. Nobody named Alderson was anywhere in this valley." Fenwick wrote that down. "Would you be willing to make a formal sworn statement to that effect?" Fenwick said. "That's why I'm here," Hicks said. Clara watched Roy Fenwick's pen move across the page and felt something that was not quite victory too early for that, too much still uncertain, but was something in the same family. The feeling of ground solidifying under a foot that has been unsure of its footing for too long. Then Nathan Caldwell arrived. She had not expected him. She had not thought he would come to the inspection personally. That was not how men like Nathan operated. They worked through intermediaries. They maintained the appearance of reasonable distance. They did not show up at 7 acres of South Montana fence line on an August morning with 2 men behind them and a face that had abandoned its pretense of pleasantness. He was not smiling when he got down from the horse. "Fenwick," he said. "Not hello, just the name like a door closing." "Mr. Caldwell," Fenwick said, carefully neutral. Nathan looked at Clara, then at Hicks, then at Silas. Something moved through his expression when he registered all 3 of them together. A rapid calculation, the kind that happens when a man counts the room and realizes the count is wrong. "I wasn't informed this would be a public proceeding," Nathan said. "It's an official inspection," Fenwick said. "Property owner and witnesses are standard." "Witnesses." Nathan said the word with a particular inflection, not quite contempt, but the outer edge of it. He looked at Hicks. "Casper, didn't expect to see you here." "I expect you didn't," Hicks said. Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. "I'd like to speak with you privately, Mrs. Whitmore." "No," she said. "There are things that could be resolved." "There is nothing to resolve privately," she said. "Everything I have to say to you is in the official record in Billings. Everything you have to say to me can be said in front of Mr. Fenwick." Nathan's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to this, to the specific closed door of a woman who has nothing left to lose by being direct. He had been navigating around her for 3 years, and each navigation had left him believing the next one would be easier. He was understanding now that they wouldn't be. "The 1859 survey document," he started, "names a family that doesn't exist," Clara said. "In a county where they have no record. Your forged purchase agreement was sloppy, wrong county seal, wrong notary jurisdiction. But this new one is worse. You invented the prior claimant entirely." She watched his face. "That's not a mistake a careful man makes. That's a mistake a man makes when he's running out of time and has stopped being careful." The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened on this property since the fire. Nathan Caldwell looked at Clara Whitmore for a long moment. She did not look away. "You'll regret making an enemy of me," he said. "You made an enemy of me 3 years ago," she said. "I've been regretting things you caused since before you decided I was worth threatening. I'm finished regretting on your behalf." Nathan looked at his men. A small gesture, barely a movement. The 2 riders turned their horses. He looked at Fenwick. "My legal representative will be contacting the Land Commission directly." "That's your right," Fenwick said. Nathan mounted and rode south. Nobody said anything until the sound of the horses had faded entirely. Then Hicks let out a long breath. "Lord Almighty," he said quietly. Fenwick looked at his ledger, then at Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I'll have my formal report to the Billings office within 4 days. I can't tell you what the outcome will be, that's the Commission's determination. But I can tell you that my report will reflect everything I've observed today." "That's all I'm asking," she said. Fenwick closed his case. He shook her hand again, and this time there was something different in it. Not a shift in professionalism, but the slight additional pressure of a man who has made a private judgment and is allowing it exactly one physical expression. He rode out. Hicks stayed. He stood in the yard and looked at the charred lean-to, and then at Clara and said, "He set that fire." "His men did," she said. "Last night." Hicks removed his hat. "Clara, Mrs. Whitmore." He seemed to be searching for something. "I should have come sooner. Not for the inspection. Before. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, any of the times I knew what was happening and told myself it wasn't my place." He looked at his hat. "Your father would be ashamed of me." "My father would say you came when it counted," Clara said. "Did it count?" "Yes," she said. "It did." Hicks put his hat back on. He nodded once. He rode east toward his own land. And then it was just Clara and Silas in the yard in the August heat, with the smell of charred wood still faint in the air and the creek running where it had always run. "It went well," Silas said. "The Alderson thing is the key," she said. "I didn't know he was going to produce that document today, but the moment Fenwick showed it to me, I knew. No record, no family. If Edmund's colleague Porter can confirm there's no Alderson filing anywhere in the territorial registration system, the counterclaim collapses entirely." "When will you know?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. She looked at the remains of the lean-to. "I need to start rebuilding that." Silas was quiet for a moment. "I can frame it," he said. "If you want." She looked at him. "I'm aware that you can frame it yourself," he said. "I'm offering because it'll go faster with 2 people." She held his gaze. "All right," she said. They went to work. The letter from Edmund Reach arrived on a Wednesday, 14 days after the inspection. Clara was at the kitchen table when she read it, and Silas was outside with the new lean-to framing, and she read it once, and then sat very still for a moment, and then stood up and walked outside. "Silas," she said. He came down from the framing. She handed him the letter. He read it. Edmund's colleague Porter had searched the full territorial registration archive. No Alderson family claim had ever been filed in any county in the Montana Territory. The 1859 survey document Nathan Caldwell had submitted was a complete fabrication, not just in its details, but in its entirety. The paper itself, Porter noted, had been artificially aged. The ink compounds did not match those commercially available in 1859 and were consistent with compounds in use from the mid-1870s onward. They had manufactured an 1859 document using 1870s materials. Edmund had forwarded everything to the Territorial Attorney General's office, not the Land Commission, the Attorney General. Silas looked up from the letter. "That's criminal fraud," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "He's not losing a land claim," Silas said. "He's looking at prosecution." "That's what the Attorney General handles," she said. "Not land disputes, criminal fraud." They stood together in the summer heat, and the wait of 14 months, 11 years really, but intensely 14 months, settled around them and rearranged itself into something different. Not light, not simple, but different. "He's going to know this is coming," Silas said. "Edmund notifying the AG's office. Caldwell has enough connections that he'll hear about it within days." "I know," Clara said. "He may try to move before it's official." "I know that too," she said. Silas handed the letter back. "Then we need to think about what he might do." "He has 3 options," she said. She had already thought this through, had been thinking about it on some level since the fire. Maybe since the pulled fence posts. Maybe since the day she walked into the trading post and found her credit cut. He runs, which means he abandons the land claim and leaves the valley and accepts that he loses everything he's built here. He fights it legally, which means a prolonged public process that exposes his entire operation to scrutiny, which is likely worse for him than losing the claim. Or he escalates, Silas said. Or he escalates, she agreed. They looked at each other. The documents, Silas said. The originals. Locked box under the floorboard, she said. But if he comes for them? He won't come himself, Silas said. If he escalates, it'll be men, and it'll be at night, and it'll look like an accident. Like the lean-to. Clara felt something cold in her chest that was not fear, but was adjacent to it. I need to get copies to Billings, she said. Certified copies on record in the territorial office today if possible. The stage to Billings leaves Harlan Creek at noon, Silas said. That's 3 hours. She was already moving toward the house. She pulled the locked box from under the floorboard, opened it, laid every document on the table, and began copying in her cleanest hand the 1861 registration, the water rights, filing the original survey, every letter from Edmund, every letter from Agnes Hartley, her own ledger documentation of the fence post positions and the fire. Silas rode to Harlan Creek and came back with 2 people. She had not expected that. He had brought Doyle Marsh. And he had brought the young woman from the post office, the one who had been collecting mail on the day Doyle first cut Clara's credit, a woman named Grace Eldon, who turned out to be a certified notary. Clara looked at Silas. A notarized copy carries more weight than a plain copy, he said simply. She looked at Grace Eldon, who she had never spoken to directly, and who met her eyes with a steadiness that suggested she had made her own decision about which side of this she was on. Mrs. Whitmore, Grace said, tell me what you need. They worked at the kitchen table for an hour and a half. Grace notarized each copy. Doyle witnessed. Silas organized the sequence for the stage package. Clara wrote a cover letter to Agnes Hartley, explaining what was being sent and why, and a separate letter to Edmund, and a third letter to the Attorney General's office in Helena, not Billings. Helena, the territorial capital, because if Nathan Caldwell had connections in the Billings office, she was not taking the chance. 3 separate packages, 3 separate destinations. When they were done, Silas rode back to Harlan Creek with the packages for the noon stage, and Clara stood in the kitchen with Doyle Marsh and Grace Eldon. You didn't have to come, she said. No, Grace said. I wanted to. She paused. I've been watching what's been happening to you for 2 years. I'm a notary. It seemed like the obvious thing. Nathan Caldwell does business with the post office, Clara said. Nathan Caldwell has been short with every woman who works for him for 20 years, Grace said. And I've been pretending not to notice because it was easier. She picked up her notary case. I'm tired of easier. Clara thought of this night by the charred lean-to. Telling Silas she was tired of being a problem a powerful man needed to solve. She thought of Hicks coming without needing 3 weeks to decide. She thought of Doyle delivering the seed order the morning after Nathan's threat. She thought of how long she had believed she was alone in this. Thank you, she said to both of them. Both of you. Doyle nodded. He looked at the kitchen, the ledger on the table, the organized stacks of documentation, the locked box now empty because everything was on its way to people who could protect it. Your father would be proud, he said. Clara did not trust herself to respond to that, so she just nodded once. They left. Silas came back at 2 o'clock and told her all 3 packages were on the stage. She was on the porch when he rode in. He took one look at her and said nothing. He unsaddled and put the horse away and came back and sat on the porch step below her. It's done, he said. Yes, she said. Now we wait. Now we wait, she said. The waiting was not passive. The next 10 days were the kind of days that look quiet from the outside and are nothing like quiet on the inside. Clara continued to run the ranch, continued to feed and water and calculate, continued to write in the ledger every evening. Silas continued to watch the south fence line and do the work of the property without making it about doing the work of the property. On the 4th day, a rider came from Harlan Creek with a message from a man she didn't know, a man named Cole Briggs, who said he was a deputy from the territorial marshal's office and that he was in town and wanted to meet with her. She rode to town with Silas. Cole Briggs was younger than she'd expected, and had the specific scrubbed seriousness of a man who has recently been given authority and has not yet decided how heavy it is. He met them at the Harlan Creek Post Office neutral ground and told them that the Territorial Attorney General's office had received her documentation package and that as a result, the Marshal's office had opened a formal investigation into Nathan Caldwell's land dealings in Harlan Creek. Plural. Dealings. It's not just your south parcel, Briggs said. When your package came in and the AG's office started looking at Caldwell's name in the registration system, they found 2 other disputed parcels in adjacent counties with similar patterns. Fabricated prior claims. Documents with inconsistent county seals. Clara felt the ground shift. He's done this before, she said. Multiple times, Briggs said. Your case was the first time anyone filed formally enough that it triggered a cross-reference. You were the first one who had documentation sufficient to show the pattern. She sat back. She had known Nathan Caldwell was targeting her property specifically. She had known he was a man who operated by acquiring and consolidating. She had not let herself know that she was not alone in being targeted. That there were others. That her 3 years of fighting might mean something not just for the Whitmore ranch, but for people she had never met in counties she had never visited. What does the investigation mean? Silas said. He was sitting beside her, and he had said very little, but he asked that question at the right moment. It means the civil land dispute is now secondary to the criminal investigation, Briggs said. It means Nathan Caldwell's assets, including the properties he's acquired through these disputed claims, may be subject to a freeze order pending the investigation's outcome. He looked at Clara. It means the Whitmore South parcel is almost certainly going to be confirmed as uncontested within the next 30 days. Clara looked at the table. 30 days. 11 years. 30 days. Are you all right, Mrs. Whitmore? Briggs said. She looked up. Yes, she said, steadily. Thank you, Deputy Briggs. Tell the Attorney General's office that I'll cooperate fully with everything they need. They'll be in touch, he said. She and Silas walked back out into the Harlan Creek street and the August heat and the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of a town that did not yet know what was happening. Clara, Silas said. She stopped walking. She turned around. I was looking at her with the expression he had, the one that saw things clearly and said them without softening them into something easier. You did this, he said. You did this, he said. The documentation, the filings, the letters, the approach to Hicks, the decision to go to Billings before he could move the fence line further. The strategy was yours. The execution was yours. I watched you do it, and I want you to hear it said plainly. He paused. You did this. Clara stood in the street. She had been told she was incapable for so long that her instinct was to deflect this, to distribute the credit, to say it was Edmund or Fenwick or Hicks or Grace Eldon or anyone but herself. She felt that instinct clearly, and she recognized it for what it was. She let it pass. Yes, she said. I did. Something in his face changed. Something that had been held carefully came a few degrees closer to the surface. Good, he said. They walked back toward where the horses were tied, and the town moved around them in its ordinary August way, and somewhere in the territorial capital of Helena, a formal investigation was opening into Nathan Caldwell's 20 years of manufactured authority, and the Whitmore Ranch sat on its north slope with its creek running and its new lean-to framing drying in the summer air, and in 30 days it would be confirmed as hers. Hers. Not hers with an asterisk, or hers pending dispute, or hers that a man is trying to take. Just hers. She thought about her father driving those first stakes in the spring of 1861. She thought about his ledger and his careful handwriting, and the way he had taught her that what you put on paper cannot be argued with by people who don't like reality. She thought about her husband in the ground on the east slope, and the 2 winters that had taken everything, and the 1 winter she had survived alone and kept surviving. She thought about a man in a worn leather vest pulling a chair up beside her in a trading post while 40 people pretended not to see. She got on her horse. She rode north. Silas rode beside her, and neither of them spoke for the first 2 miles, and the silence between them was not the silence of people with nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said enough for now and are simply for this moment in the same place at the same time and finding that sufficient. At the turnoff to the ranch, Clara stopped her horse. Silas stopped beside her. She looked at the land, her father's land, her land, the land that was almost fully and finally hers. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "The morning after you told me about your wife and your daughters," she said, "I thought about you differently after that. Not with pity, I want to be clear about that." "I know," he said. "I thought about what it means to be a person who has lost the thing that made the rest of the world make sense," she said. "And who builds a life inside that loss, around that loss, and keeps going, not because the loss gets smaller, but because you get not bigger exactly, but more capable of holding it." She paused. "I've been doing that for 11 years. I think you've been doing it for 15. He said nothing. "I think you came down from that mountain for the horses," she said. "And I think you stayed because something in you recognized something in me. And I think that something is exactly that, two people who know how to hold loss without being destroyed by it." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not making a declaration. I'm saying that I see that in you, and I want you to know I see it." Silas Blackwood sat on his horse in the August sun and looked at Clara Whitmore for a long time. "I've been trying to decide," he said, "whether to tell you that I intend to stay." She waited. "Not as a hand," he said. "Not as someone fixing your fence posts and sleeping in your barn. As someone who is deciding to be somewhere." He paused. "I haven't decided to be somewhere in 15 years. "I know," she said. "It's significant." "I know," she said again, steadily, warmly. He nodded once. He looked north at the ranch, and south at the creek, and east at the long slope where the cattle grazed, and then back at her. "I'll need to go back up to the Beartooth," he said. "Close out the timber claim. Bring the herd down." "How long?" 2 weeks, he said. "Maybe 3. "The land commission decision should come within 30 days, she said. "You'd be back for it." "Yes," he said. She turned her horse toward the ranch. He rode beside her. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that 2 weeks was a long time, and 30 days was a long time, and the space between where they were and where they were going was full of things that hadn't been said yet, and might take years to say fully, and that this was not a problem. This was exactly how it should be. Some things built slowly and carefully on solid ground hold longer than anything. And the Whitmore Ranch had good ground. Clara had always known that. Now finally, everyone else was going to know it too. He rode out on a Thursday morning 3 days after Deputy Briggs had delivered the news that changed everything. Clara stood at the paddock gate and watched him go. He had packed light the way a man packs when he intends to come back and is not making a ceremony out of the leaving. Saddlebags, a bedroll, the surveyor's compass he had used to reset her stakes the night the fence posts were moved. He stopped at the gate and looked at her. 2 weeks, he said. "I'll be here," she said. He tipped his hat, not the performed gesture of a man trying to look like something, but the small private version of it, the one that means something between two people who have established a language. He rode north. She watched until the horse was a dark shape against the summer sky, and then a memory of a shape, and then nothing. She turned back to the ranch. She had work to do. The first week without him was strange, in a way she had not prepared for, which bothered her because she had prepared for most things. She had been alone on this ranch for years before he arrived, and she knew every task and every timing and every animal's particular personality, and there was nothing here that required another person. But the knowing and the feeling were two different things, and she found that she had grown accustomed to another presence in a way that 11 years of deliberate solitude could not insulate her against. She managed it the way she managed most things. She worked. She wrote to Agnes Hartley in Billings, confirming her full cooperation with the Attorney General's investigation. She wrote to Edmund Reach, thanking him for everything specifically, with the particular care of a woman who understands that gratitude stated precisely is more meaningful than gratitude stated effusively. She drove to Harlan Creek and paid a social call on Grace Eldon at the post office, which surprised Grace considerably, and the two of them had a conversation over the post office counter that lasted 40 minutes and covered topics ranging from the Territorial Attorney General's timeline to whether Doyle Marsh's wife had ever actually liked Nathan Caldwell or had just been polite. She sold 2 older cattle to cover the credit gap. She replanted the kitchen garden with the seed order Doyle had finally delivered. She finished the lean-to framing herself, which took 3 days and 1 bruised hand and a significant amount of language she would not have used in company. On the 9th day, Casper Hicks came by. He brought 2 fence posts he'd had cut from his own timber, which she hadn't asked for, and which were exactly the right size for the east paddock section she'd been meaning to repair. He unloaded them without ceremony, and she made coffee, and they sat on the porch and talked about the investigation and what it might mean for the valley. "There are people," Hicks said carefully, "who are starting to talk." "About what?" she said. "About what Nathan's been doing, the other properties, the pattern." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Folks who've been doing business with him for 20 years are reconsidering." "They should have reconsidered 3 years ago," she said. "Yes," he said. "They should have." He looked at her. "But they're reconsidering now, which is something." "It's something," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "You know what the difference is between now and 3 years ago?" She waited. "3 years ago you were fighting alone," he said. "People assumed that meant something was wrong with you. Now they can see what was actually wrong." He looked out at the land. "People are sheep, Clara. Mrs. Whitmore. I mean that without cruelty. Most people need to see someone else move before they can move. You moved. Blackwood moved beside you. Fenwick moved. Edmund Reach moved. And now," he gestured vaguely, "people are moving." Clara thought about this. She thought about what Silas had said to her in the Harlan Creek Street. "You did this," and what she had thought when she heard it. She thought about the difference between accepting credit and understanding consequence. "I don't want to be a cause," she said. "You don't get to choose that," Hicks said. She looked at him. "When a person stands up for something real, they become part of how other people understand what's possible," he said. "Whether they wanted to or not. That's just how it works." She drank her coffee. She didn't argue. Because he was right, and she knew it, and it was the kind of right that asked something of her. She wasn't entirely sure she was ready to give. Not the fighting she had always been ready for the fighting. But the being seen, the being known, the becoming, as he said, part of how other people understood what was possible. That was harder. On the 12th day, Nathan Caldwell left the valley. She didn't hear it directly. She heard it through Doyle Marsh, who heard it through 2 sources simultaneously, which in Harlan Creek meant it was almost certainly true. Nathan had loaded a wagon at the Caldwell property at dawn, taken his household and driven south. No announcement, no formal statement, no farewell to anyone. Just gone. Doyle came to the ranch to tell her personally, which she thought was decent of him. He stood in the yard with his hat in his hands. He always did that. Now she noticed where before he had kept his hat on when speaking to her and told her what he'd heard. She received the news without visible reaction, which Doyle seemed to find perplexing. "I thought you'd be relieved," he said. "I am relieved," she said. "But I'm not finished until the commission issues the formal determination." She looked at him. "Nathan Caldwell leaving the valley doesn't clear the title. It doesn't resolve the investigation. It just means he's decided prosecution is more likely than acquittal, and he'd rather run." She paused. "I don't celebrate men running. I wait for the official record to reflect reality." Doyle nodded slowly. "You know you sound different than you used to." She looked at him. "How so?" He thought about it. "More certain," he said. "Not that you weren't certain before, but before it sounded like you were arguing with someone. Now it sounds like you're just stating things." Clara considered this. "I suppose I've stopped expecting to be argued with," she said. That was as close as she could get to naming what had changed. Not her certainty that had always been there, but the quality of it. The difference between a woman who knows she is right and is bracing for the fight, and a woman who knows she is right and is simply standing in it. Doyle left. She went back inside. She opened the ledger. She wrote the date and Nathan Caldwell's departure in the record, in her clearest hand, the way her father had taught her everything, documented everything real, everything in ink. Silas came back on day 16. She heard the horse before she saw him, the specific cadence of a horse she had learned, and she was out on the porch by the time he came through the north gate. He was dustier than when he'd left, and there was something about him that had resolved some interior thing that had been in the process of being decided when he rode out and had been decided in the Beartooth and was now simply settled. He dismounted. He looked at her. "Nathan Caldwell left," she said. "I heard in Harlan Creek," he said. "The determination." "Not yet," she said. "But soon." Edmund wrote, "The commission is meeting on the 22nd. He nodded. "How is the mountain?" she said. "Cold at night," he said. "Even in August." He led the horse toward the barn. "The timber claim is closed. The herd is at Hicks's spread. He offered to hold them while I get the south pasture fenced properly." She blinked. "You spoke to Hicks?" "I rode past on the way in," he said. "He offered. I accepted." He glanced back at her. "Is that all right?" "Yes," she said. It came out softer than she intended. "Yes, that's fine." He continued to the barn. She stood on the porch. She thought about what it meant that he had arranged his cattle at Hicks's spread. That was not a man who planned to leave in 2 weeks. That was a man who was integrating himself into the practical geography of a place. Those were the actions of someone who had made a decision about where he was. She went inside and started supper for 2 without thinking about it, and then thought about it and felt the warmth of the not thinking about it as a thing worth noticing. He came in from the barn 40 minutes later, washed up at the pump outside, and sat at the kitchen table in the way he had settled, unhurried, comfortable in the space in a way that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with belonging. "I brought something back," he said. He reached into his vest and put a letter on the table. She looked at it. The return address was Helena, the territorial capital. Her heart moved. She picked it up. It was not the official commission determination that would come through the Billings office. This was a letter from the office of the Territorial Attorney General, addressed to her directly informing her that the criminal investigation into Nathan Caldwell's land fraud scheme had been formally opened and that investigators had identified 4 properties in 3 counties, with patterns consistent with the scheme used against the Whitmore Ranch. The letter further stated that her documentation had been entered as primary evidence in the investigation and that she might be called to provide testimony before the territorial grand jury. And at the bottom, in a sentence that she read 3 times, "The office wishes to commend Mrs. Moore for the thoroughness and precision of her documentation, which was materially essential to establishing the pattern of criminal conduct under investigation." She set the letter down. "Primary evidence," Silas said. "Yes," she said. "Your father's surveyor notes," he said. "Your ledger entries. The date-marked documentation. Everything I was told was excessive," she said. "Everything people said I was being stubborn about. Every time someone told me to let it go and stop keeping records." She looked at the letter. Primary evidence. She felt something move through her that was not triumph and was not vindication. Exactly. Those were words for people who had been waiting for the world to confirm something they weren't sure about. She had always been sure. What she felt was something more like the relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long distance and has finally reached the place where they can set it down. "Clara," Silas said. She looked up. "Put the letter in the cabinet," he said. "Eat your supper." She almost laughed. Not almost, she laughed actually, which surprised her slightly, and the sound of it in the kitchen was something she recognized from a long time ago. She put this letter in the cabinet. She sat down. They ate supper. The commission determination arrived on a Tuesday, 8 days later. It came via the Harlan Creek post office, and Grace Eldon sent a rider out, rather than waiting for Clara's weekly trip to town, which told Clara everything about Grace Eldon's character that she needed to know and respected completely. She was in the kitchen when the rider came. Silas was at the south fence. She sent the rider back with a coin and a thank you, and stood at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The Territorial Land Commission, in its official determination, found. As follows: the 1859 survey document submitted by Nathan Caldwell was determined to be fraudulent in both origin and content. The corresponding counterclaim against the Whitmore South parcel registration was dismissed in its entirety. The original, 1861, Whitmore registration was confirmed as valid, uncontested, and controlling. The South parcel, including the creek-adjacent 40 acres and associated water rights, was confirmed as the exclusive legal property of Clara Elizabeth Whitmore of Harlan Creek, Montana Territory. She read it once. She put it down. She picked it up and read it again, specifically the sentence that said confirmed as the exclusive legal property of Clara Elizabeth Whitmore. She folded it carefully. She walked to the door. "Silas," she called. He came up from the south fence at a walk, and then at something faster when he saw her face, and he came across the yard, and she met him at the porch steps and handed him the determination without a word. He read it. He looked up. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he did something she had not expected. He reached out and put his hand over hers, the way people do when words have reached the limit of what they can carry, and something physical is needed to hold the rest. She didn't pull away. She stood on the porch steps of her ranch on a Tuesday in late August, with the territorial determination in her hand, and a man's hand over hers, and the creek running in the south, and her father's land confirmed and legal and real, and she stood there for a long moment and let it be exactly what it was. She went to Harlan Creek that afternoon, not because she had to, because she wanted to walk into the town that had watched her fight for 11 years, and had mostly watched from a comfortable distance, and be simply a woman who had won, who walked in the ordinary afternoon light, and did her ordinary business, and required no one's approval. She tied her horse at the mercantile. She went inside. 2 women were at the fabric counter. Women who had crossed the street to avoid her shadow in years past. Women who had believed the things they'd been told about difficult women who lived alone and ran ranches and refused to be managed. They looked up when she came in. She met their eyes. She nodded. One of them nodded back. The other looked at the floor. It was enough. She bought a bolt of canvas, the one she had been going to buy in July, when all of this started, and a new ledger because the current one was nearly full, and a small quantity of lamp oil. She paid for everything with cash and thanked Doyle Marsh, who was behind the counter and who asked with genuine diffidence whether the determination had come. "This morning," she said. He exhaled. A long, slow exhale of someone who has been holding something. "I'm glad," he said. "Are you going to be all right?" she said. "With the Caldwell account gone?" He seemed surprised she'd asked. "I'll manage," he said. 40% is recoverable if you're willing to work for it, which I am." He paused. "And I expect I'll have some of your business back." "You will," she said. She carried her purchases to the wagon. Grace Eldon came out of the post office as she was loading. "Congratulations, Mrs. Whitmore," Grace said. "Thank you, Grace," she said. "For everything, the notarization, the rider this morning." "The rider this morning was my own idea," Grace said. "I thought you should know as soon as possible." "I did," Clara said. "I was grateful." Grace looked at the mercantile, the street, the town in its Tuesday afternoon ordinariness. "Things are going to be different here," she said. "With Nathan gone, with the investigation, people are unsettled, unsure what the valley looks like without him in it." "The valley looks the same," Clara said. "The creek still runs, the grass still grows, the cattle don't care who the most important man in the county was." She loaded the last package. "People will figure out how to organize themselves without needing a Nathan Caldwell to organize around." "Some people," Grace said carefully, "are already organizing around you." Clara looked at her. "There's a woman from the North Settlement," Grace said. "Her name is Frances Alton. Her family has a land dispute with a rancher who uses the same kind of pressure Nathan used. She asked me if I knew someone who could advise her on documentation and filing." Grace paused. "I told her I'd ask you." Clara stood very still. She thought about what Hicks had said, about becoming part of how other people understood what was possible, about not getting to choose that. "Tell her to come to the ranch on Saturday," she said. Grace smiled, a real smile, not a careful one. I will. Clara drove home. Silas was building the south pasture fence when she got back, setting posts with the surveyor's compass checked against each one, the way a man builds something he intends to last. She unloaded the wagon and put the canvas and the lamp oil away and set the new ledger on the kitchen table, where it sat clean and empty and full of possibility. She went out to the south pasture. She stood at the fence line and watched him work. After a moment, he said without looking up, "How was town?" "Manageable," she said. "People know. They will by morning," she said. He drove in a post and checked it with the compass. "There's something I want to show you," he said. She waited. He reached into his vest, the old leather vest worn and sun-bleached, and entirely itself, and produced a small folded paper. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was a land registration form, a new one blank from the territorial office in Billings. At the top in his hand, he had written, "Application for registration, North Beartooth Timber Parcel, applicant S. Blackwood adjacent to Whitmore Ranch north boundary." She looked at the form. She looked at him. "Adjacent to," she said. "Adjacent to," he confirmed. She understood what this was. It was not a declaration, he was not that kind of man, and she would not have wanted that kind of declaration, even if he had been. It was something more practical, and therefore more real. It was a man filing a land claim next to a woman's land because he intended to be next to her land. Because adjacent to was how you said "I am staying" without making it about anything other than the facts. She looked at the form for a long moment. "You'll need a witness for the filing," she said. "I know someone," he said. She folded the form and handed it back. "The application needs the north boundary survey markers," she said. "I have the original Whitmore survey notes that document the north line. You can reference them in the filing." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. Actually smiled the full version of it, which she had seen only a few times and which changed his face significantly, gave it back something that must have been there before 15 years of loss. She walked back toward the house. "Clara," he said. She stopped. "What you said," he said. "Before I went back up. About two people who know how to hold loss without being destroyed by it." She turned. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "Up on the mountain, in the timber claim, on the ride back." He looked at her steadily. "I think you were right, and I think there's something else." She waited. "I think the people who know how to hold loss are also the ones who know how to hold what comes after," he said. "Because they know what things cost. They don't take what they have for granted." He paused. "I haven't had something I didn't want to take for granted in a long time." She stood at the edge of the south pasture in the late August light and looked at Silas Blackwood and understood that he was telling her something true, something that had been built slowly and carefully over the weeks of fence posts and ledger entries and letters to Billings and a night beside a charred lean-to, something that had been tested by separation and confirmed by return. "Neither have I," she said. He nodded once. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the new ledger and opened it to the first page and wrote the date at the top, and then below it she wrote what had happened today, the determination, the town, the form in her clearest hand, precisely and completely. She wrote the way her father had taught her, the way a woman writes who knows that what you put on paper is what lasts. Frances Alton came on Saturday. She was 34 with 2 children and a land dispute that was smaller than Clara's, but organized by the same logic pressure manufactured debt. The assumption that a woman fighting alone will eventually stop fighting. She had brought her documentation in a flour sack, which told Clara everything about the resources she had available, and nothing diminishing about the woman herself. Clara sat across from her at the kitchen table and went through every document. She asked the questions she had learned to ask county registration survey markers, water rights, any prior claims, any communications from the other party. She took notes in the new ledger in her organized hand. Frances watched her with an expression Clara recognized. It was the expression of a person who has been managing something alone for so long that encountering someone who immediately understands the full shape of the problem is disorienting. "You're the one who beat Nathan Caldwell," Frances said. "The Territorial Commission beat Nathan Caldwell," Clara said. I gave them the material to work with. That's the same thing. It's not, Clara said. But it's close enough. She turned the page in the ledger. Your documentation is in decent order for the water rights. The survey markers are your weak point. Do you have any dated records of their original positions? My husband set them in 1879, Francis said. He wrote the measurements in a journal. That journal is the most important thing you own right now, Clara said. Where is it? At home. I need you to make a copy of the relevant entries today before you go back, Clara said. I'll lend you paper and ink. Make the copy here in front of me so I can witness the date. She looked at Francis. Never keep all your documentation in one place. The copy stays with you. The original journal stays somewhere no one would look. Francis stared at her. You've done this before. I've been doing this for 11 years, Clara said. Something shifted in Francis Alton's face. Not relief exactly, more like a woman who has been walking a narrow ridge and has just found that the ridge is wider than she thought, that there is room to stand firmly if you know where to put your feet. How long will this take? Francis said. My situation depends on how fast you file and how organized you are when you do, Clara said. If your documentation is solid and you file before the other party can change the physical evidence weeks. If you wait, she paused. Don't wait. I've been waiting 2 years, Francis said. I thought if I didn't make trouble. I know what you thought, Clara said. The waiting doesn't make the trouble smaller. It makes the other person more certain you won't fight. She handed Francis a sheet of paper. Start copying. Silas came in from his pasture while Francis was copying and stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the situation, and then went to the stove and poured himself coffee without intruding on what was happening at the table. He understood the shape of it, the way he understood most things, by looking at it once and not needing it, explained. Francis looked up from her copying and registered him. This is Silas Blackwood, Clara said. He's the one who told me about the county consolidation discrepancy in Nathan Caldwell's forged document. Francis looked at Silas. Do you know county registration history? She said. Directly. He looked at Clara. She looked at her ledger. Yes, he said. I do. Then I have a question, Francis said. She turned back to her copying and kept talking as she wrote, and Silas sat down at the table and answered her question, and then 2 more. And Clara listened to the shape of it. This woman, and this man, and this kitchen, and the particular business of people who know things, helping people who need to know them, and she felt something she did not have a precise name for. It was not happiness exactly. It was more specific than happiness. It was the feeling of a woman who has spent 11 years holding something alone, finally understanding that holding it alone was never the point. The point was holding it. And that holding it had made her into someone who could teach someone else to hold theirs. That was the thing Nathan Caldwell had never understood about Clara Whitmore. He had thought he was fighting a woman who wanted to keep a piece of land. He had not understood that the land was never what she was fighting for. She was fighting for the right to be exactly who she was in the place she had chosen on her own terms, without apology. She had won that fight. Not when the commission issued the determination. Not when Nathan Caldwell left the valley. Not even when Silas Blackwood pulled a chair up beside her in the Harlan Creek trading post. She had won it in the years before any of that. In every winter, she had survived alone. Every document she had filed. Every fence post she had reset every morning. She had gotten out of bed and run the numbers and decided to stay. The determination had only made it official. The truth had always been true. That evening, after Francis Alton had gone home with her copied documents and a clear list of next steps and the particular squared shoulder posture of a woman who has just been reminded of her own capability, Clara and Silas sat on the porch in the end of the August light. The summer was ending. She could feel it in the way the evenings were coming earlier, the way the heat had a different quality still present, but beginning to consider its exit. In a month, the first cold would come. In 2 months, she would need to have the winter preparations complete. She was already calculating. You're making a list, Silas said. She looked at him. How can you tell? Your expression, he said. You get a specific look when you're counting something. I was thinking about winter prep, she said. There's time, he said. There's always less time than you think, she said. But she put the calculations aside. They sat in the quiet, and the creek was audible from here, in the evening stillness, and the cattle were settled in the east pasture, and the new lean-to stood solid and level at the south end of the property, and the land was hers in ink, and in fact, and in the particular bone-deep way of things that have been fought for rather than given. Frances will be all right, Silas said. If she files promptly and doesn't back down, Clara said. She will, he said. She came here, didn't she? That tells you something. It tells me she's more tired of being afraid than she is afraid, Clara said. That's enough to work with. He was quiet for a moment. You're going to do this again, he said. For other women. If they come, she said. They'll come, he said. She looked at him. You were the first one who did, he said. First to file formally, first to build the case properly, first to take it to the territorial level instead of just fighting it locally. People know that. The valley knows it. Other valleys will know it. He paused. You built something here that's bigger than a land title, Clara. She held his gaze. I built what I built so I could keep what was mine, she said. Yes, he said. And in doing it, you showed other people how to keep what was theirs. He looked out at the land. That's what your father did too. He built something that was supposed to be just for your family, and it ended up being bigger than your family, because that's what happens when someone builds something real. She thought about her father driving stakes in the spring of 1861. She thought about him crossing the street to tell people that Casper Hicks was a man of character. She thought about him riding 40 miles in January to get medicine he hadn't been asked for. He had always known without saying it that a person's life is not measured by what they accumulate, but by what they make possible for the people around them. She thought she understood that now in a way she hadn't when she was merely surviving. Thank you, she said. For what? He said. She looked at him directly. For the chair, she said. That first day, for pulling up the chair. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said, for not telling me to take it back. The light was almost gone now. The sky moving through its evening colors, and the creek ran on in the dark, and the Whitmore ranch settled into the quiet of a place that has found its shape, and the man who had come down from the mountain, and the woman who had refused to leave it, sat side by side in the last of the August warmth, and neither of them looked away. A woman who had spent 11 years being certain of her aloneness had discovered that certainty, like most things, depends on the evidence available at the time. The evidence had changed. She was still the same woman who had driven her wagon into Harlan Creek on a Tuesday in July, with a list and no patience, and more fight in her than any room had ever been ready to hold. But she was also now a woman who had set down the particular weight of believing that fighting alone was the only kind of fighting available to her. And in its place, she had picked up something lighter and stronger and entirely worth carrying. Something she intended to carry for a very long time. On her own land. In her own name. Beside a man who had finally decided that adjacent to